Amidst tear gas and rubber bullets, protesters in Belarus have brought the regime of Alexander Lukashenko to the brink. Hundreds of thousands of ordinary people have made their voices heard in every city in Belarus, despite brutal and murderous behaviour from the internal security forces. Workers in Belarus's state factories and prized IT sector have gone on strike, and several members of the regime, including the former Minister of Culture, have defected to the opposition. Public television employees, who normally grind out regime propaganda, have refused to work, and have had to be replaced by journalists and technicians provided by Russian state TV. Last weekend, the country's largest ever protest since the end of Soviet rule spooked Lukashenko so much that he evacuated his palace via helicopter, wearing a bulletproof vest and brandishing a rifle. Since then, the regime has continued its crackdown, randomly arresting protesters off the street and deliberately attacking journalists and human rights activists.
Welcome to Dissidents and Dictators, a series of conversations by the Human Rights Foundation dedicated to exposing and challenging authoritarianism around the world.
Andrei Sannikov was a career diplomat and the deputy foreign minister of Belarus before resigning in protest of Lukashenko's policies. He co-founded the human rights initiative Charter 97 and ran for president in 2010. He received the highest number of votes of all the opposition candidates, but was jailed and sentenced to 5 years in prison after organizing peaceful protests against the falsification of election results. In jail, he was beaten and tortured, but released after 16 months. Today, he continues advocating for democracy in Belarus with the civil campaign European Belarus. I want to start by asking you how you got involved in politics in Belarus and what led you to run for president in 2010.
It's easy how I got involved because I am Belarusian and I never wanted, and of course I was born a long time ago when the Soviet Union still existed, and I was born a year after Stalin died. But I always felt that I belonged to Belarus, not to the bigger country, which was called Soviet Union. So when Perestroika started, when the changes started to occur in the Soviet Union, I immediately saw that there is a hope and there is a chance for independent country called Belarus. And at that time I was studying in diplomatic academy in Moscow, but I was hoping that very soon I will be able to work as a diplomat for independent Belarus, and it happened so. I started to work in the foreign ministry of the Belarusian Soviet Socialist Republic, but very soon it became foreign ministry of the Republic of Belarus, independent country. So there was no special occasion, special circumstances. I just was naturally working for the country, first as a Soviet part of the Soviet Union, and then as an independent country. That's how I got involved and continue to be involved in the politics.
And what led you to run for president in 2010?
It was the decision it was a collective decision of the team. I'm proud to have the best team in the country, and my campaign did demonstrate that we had, for example, we had on my team 3 former heads of state of Belarus, Stanislav Shushkevich and Mieczyslav Grip, not 3, sorry, 2. We had former Minister of Defense of Independent Belarus and other dignitaries, well-known people in my country. So that was the time when we as a team didn't see that we could support anybody who was intending to run. And then we took a decision that I have to step in the race and start this campaign on my own as a candidate and on our own as a team, because before we were just supporting Other candidates, like in 2001, we supported the candidate who was running from the opposition. In 2006, we did the same. And there was a lot of disappointments connected with this kind of campaign that we were not running but helping to run. So we decided that we're quite ready to run our own campaign, and I think that we did demonstrate that we had the strongest campaign in the country.
Mm-hmm. And what is different about the 2020 presidential campaign and the aftermath of that than in 2010?
Difference is that in 2010, for the first time, Lukashenko used force and brutality on the day of election. He didn't do it before. And because he was waiting for the moment when foreign journalists leave and when international observers leave. So he was so scared with our performance that he was so scared with the support that we got from the people. He was losing, and he lost that election. But he was so scared that he started to beat us immediately, to use force and arresting candidates, arresting thousands of people.
Mm-hmm.
This year is absolutely different because he started his crackdown before the election, attacking first of all the strongest candidates, and it is not only those who declared the intention to run and had the right to run, like banker Viktor Babaryka, like blogger Sergei Tikhanovsky, but also the established leaders of the opposition, like Nikolai Statkevich, who is also in prison, and Pavel Severinets, who is also in prison. So these are four figures that would have easily won the election against Lukashenko with a landslide victory. So he attacked them, he attacked their teams, he attacked the groups that were collecting signatures, and he thought that he prevented the active scenario of his rejection by putting people in jail, by fabricating cases against them. So that is the difference, the level of violence and level of aggressiveness that comes from Lukashenko, but also this amazing mood of the people, absolutely amazing numbers of people protesting all over Belarus. In previous years, mostly Minsk was the center of the protest. Today we see that all over Belarus people are protesting. There are actually, I think, several million people that are taking part in the protest. Mm-hmm. And they didn't stop, despite the not only force but also the killing that Lukashenko has started in the country. And despite these ferocious, aggressive, unlawful activities of his thugs, threatening people, killing people, crippling people, throwing people in jail, people are still protesting. Women are protesting, old people are protesting, a lot of young people. So it is amazing to see this absolutely peaceful, courageous protest all over the country.
Do you think that something has changed in Belarusian society that's led to this new energy and protest?
Yeah, absolutely. One word is the people are fed up. But he provoked it himself because he thought that Lukashenko, dictator Lukashenko, he started to demonstrate how much he despised the people. He started to humiliate people. He started to offend them. And I think COVID-19 was the red line that people would never forget him because he not only denied the pandemic and intentionally exposed people to this virus by organizing military parade, by organizing so-called subotnik, the free of charge work on Saturday, by not allowing schools to close down and thus pushing children to go to expose themselves to this virus also, But then he started to blame people themselves for dying, and in very derogatory terms. And then people really saw, I think, very clearly what kind of person he is, what kind of brutal animal he is. That's one thing. The other thing, they started to organize themselves. They started to sabotage every decision that he was taking on COVID-19. Children were kept at home. Parents simply didn't allow them to go to school. Private companies were working online, and some of the state companies also were taking decisions not to go to work and observe social distance wherever possible. So I think that kind of his contemptuous attitude towards people was really the last straw. And now he's crossing every red line, which is just adding to the hatred of the people towards him.
It's interesting that you use the word dignity, because many people called the 2014 revolution in Ukraine the revolution of dignity as well. Do you think that similar forces are at play in Belarus, or is this something entirely different?
No, absolutely. We're quite often people do not understand what Belarusis and Belarusians are, because a lot of dignity, a lot of let's say, people are maybe more composed, more calm than in some other countries. It takes time to become from good-natured people to the people who defend themselves against dangers. But definitely, it's always about dignity. In every revolution, in every protest against dictator, it's always about dignity, because dictators are known to hate people. Dictators are known to despise their own people, their own parents, their own children. And I think that in Belarus it is so clear that it is about dignity, it is about the pride of the people, it's about nation, it's about national identity. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes I hear reproaches that because of weak national identity, Belarus cannot achieve anything. No, we have very strong national identity. Mm-hmm. Look at the flags. Those are banned flags, white, red and white. Mm-hmm. But they appeared immediately on the very first days of the protest after the so-called election day. And it means that everybody, every family at least, had this flag hidden somewhere. And then they came out with them proudly waving them.
Can you explain a little bit more what the history of the white, red, white flag is, and what the national identity of Belarusians is, and how that's manifesting itself?
You know, it was of course it was hidden, it was suppressed during the Soviet times, because Belarus was the showcase of the Soviet Union. It was like an exemplary Soviet republic, and it started with and that's why we were under enormous pressure culturally, historically, and even language-wise, because there was a story when Khrushchev came to Minsk. It was, I think, 1959, to mark the 40th anniversary of the creation of Belarusian Soviet Socialist Republic. And then first secretary of the Communist Party of Belarus, Kiselyov, he made a speech in Belarusian. And Khrushchev simply hated it. And he said after that, he was saying that something like, if we want to become really Soviet people, we have to speak Russian, all of us. And Belarus was made an example in this sense also. There was a immediately campaign to suppress Belarusian language, and with the language, of course, you know that the identity is very closely tied. So it was little we knew about our true history, as maybe Transcaucasian republics knew more, because it's different culture, but we were deprived of history, of culture. And then all of a sudden, when perestroika started in the 80s, late 80s, mid 80s, late 80s, we started to discover our own history together with the different history of the Soviet Union, the different history of the Gulag, of the prohibited culture of books and philosophers and sociologists, really great scientists that were thrown in prison in all over the Soviet Union, including Belarus. We found out that on the night of October 29, 1937, more than 100 creme of de la creme of our intellectuals were murdered, by the way, in the same prison that I was kept for some time. And those were the names that we didn't know. Some of them we knew. They were allowed to be included into our literature books. But many of them we simply didn't know. They were. The purpose was to completely kill Belarus and Belarusians as a nation, as a country, as an identity. But 80s did demonstrate that we survived, and we know a lot about our own history. And in the 80s we learned that our flag is white, red and white, because it was. And in the 80s everybody learned. Of course, our historians and our national democratic leaders knew the history very well, that Belarus was proclaimed in 1918. And at that time, a very difficult time, there was a step towards renewing our independence after so many years living under Russian Empire. And then came the flag that was the old flag, of course, with historical roots, but then it became an official flag of Belarusian Popular Republic. And since then, this flag was kept in memories. And in 1991, it became the state flag of the independent country Belarus. And that's from then we proudly exposed these flags everywhere. And that's why Lukashenko his first attack was on the symbols of our national identity, this white, red and white flag and the coat of arms chase, Pahonia. He organized a legal referendum and changed them to the quasi-Soviet symbols, like it is called sunset over the swamp, the current Lukashenko flag.
Why do you think that Lukashenko has such a nostalgia for the Soviet period? Is it linked to his, desire to be a dictator, sort of savior of the people?
Absolutely, he hated everything national. It is really a unique case when a dictator is established and built his regime not based on the national identity, but on denial of national identity. Mm-hmm. He posed as internationalist. He posed as the guardian of memories and of the Soviet Union and nostalgia over the Soviet Union, and he hated every national democratic leader, and that's why he attacked the symbols. It was important for him to reintroduce this quasi, because it has nothing to do with proper heraldic rules, what he invented as his flag and coat of arms. Why? Because he was ambitious from the childhood, I believe, and probably his wildest dream was to become the party leader in the region or in the district. And then all of a sudden he was elected president of a country. So he decided that his dream came true, and then he would organize his system of government like he saw during the communist regime. So he was, yes, deliberately, consciously following practices of the Soviet Union, but not only. In 1995 he said that his ideal model of presidential state is Hitler, Germany under Hitler. And it was not a joke as we see it.
Is there still a post-Soviet mentality in Belarus? Do people still feel nostalgic for the Soviet Union?
No, I don't think so. People, if they do, they simply don't know what it is to live in a proper democratic state where your rights are being protected by the law, not by the whimsies of some party leaders. I don't think that there is a lot of nostalgia, because nostalgia was connected with very simple facts, like some of them are imaginary, like the education free of charge, healthcare free of charge. We discovered that it's not free of charge, because people were getting miserable salaries and wages in the Soviet times, and having allegedly free services. They were not free. Everybody in the Soviet Union knew that if you want to have qualified medical advice, assistance, you have to pay illegally, unlawfully to the doctor. But there was a myth that life was protected in the Soviet Union, which was not. So there were people in the early years of Lukashenko rule that were hoping that he will restore this kind of Soviet Union. But it was not his intention. He wanted to restore the system of power that existed in the Soviet Union, to rob the people. And that's what he is doing till this day.
And much has been made of the relationship between Belarus and Russia. And people have commented that Putin and Lukashenko don't have a good relationship, but that nevertheless they need each other. And how do you think, if the protests are successful, how do you think Belarus's relationship with Russia will change or not change? Is it possible, at least in the short or medium term, for Belarus to be entirely independent of Russia?
Yes, they really do. I mean, Putin and Lukashenko, they hate each other, but they are of the same kind. Lukashenko never will trust anybody in the West, for example. He will not trust Putin as well, but he does understand Putin's motivation, and he does understand how to blackmail Putin in many cases. Ironically, if without Lukashenko, the relationship with Russia will be much better. But I wonder if Putin needs such kind of relationship, more predictable, more law-based than, based on criminal and dirty business, or some schemes that are hidden from the world but are quite lucrative for the mafioso groups that are ruling both countries. I think that what we are watching the same show every year. It's the fight over the oil and gas price that Lukashenko and Putin are directing from both sides. It's a show. It's a show that they are pretending to be mad at each other. Then Russia, of course, uses it as a leverage on Lukashenko. It's clear, but it is not how the relationship should go, because the interstate relationship are based on laws, on agreements, on treaties, that pacta sunt servanda, that have to be complied with. And the best example, I think, this Treaty of Union State, so-called Union State. It doesn't exist, but everybody is pretending from both sides that there is a Union State Treaty.
Is there any chance of this Union State Treaty becoming a reality?
There is always a chance, because there are a lot of legal, let's say, provisions very dangerous for our independence. So if Lukashenko manages to maintain power, which is very unlikely, even if he tries to stifle the protest today, then the independence will be really threatened, because he would yield to Putin everything to keep his regime intact, to keep his power in Belarus. So I think, yes, it is a very big threat. But I hope that, again, I wouldn't want to have such a development, to see such development. But I hope that nobody would recognize anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like nobody, I mean, the West in general didn't recognize annexation of Baltic states,
Mm-hmm.
which helped them a lot. It was a precedent, and I think because this treaty is illegal, it's unlawful. It was signed and then developed without any approval of the people by Lukashenko, who already usurped the power and didn't have authority to sign treaty on behalf of Belarus.
Mm-hmm.
And by Yeltsin, it was, by the way, it was signed by Yeltsin. That was also not a proper interstate treaty, but something that was used by Yeltsin to help his presidential campaign in '96, and later it was signed in '99. So I think that, to answer your question shortly, yes, it's a danger, but it cannot be taken as a real thing.
I want to get back to the protests today. What do you think victory for the protesters looks like? They've been going on for several weeks now already. There's the biggest protests ever last weekend, forcing Lukashenko to flee in a helicopter with a rifle. But what do you think, how do the protesters now win? How do you think they can achieve their goal of unseating Lukashenko?
Well, it's not very... it's not easy, of course, to say how it will happen, but I can tell you that he is destroying the basis on which he himself destroying the basis on which his regime was built and was supported, because eventually economy will be ruining his power and his regime. And today I think he has only one support, that is his thugs in uniform and with the ammunition and with weapons, and nobody else. Even if you notice that even the government is silent, you don't hear anybody from the government speaking, because they're probably hastily deciding when to step down, when to resign. I think that he is now attacking workers mostly, because dictators understand if there is a strike, and general strike in the country, then it will not be the days that are numbered, but the hours. So that he is doing everything to put pressure, to kidnap, to throw in jail, to oust of the country the leaders of the trade unions. Not trade unions, because we don't have actual independent trade unions, but workers, leaders of workers. But I think it is a really, what we saw is the total rejection of Lukashenko and his regime by the country. Mm-hmm. And it cannot go unnoticed. Unfortunately, we don't have adequate reaction from the West, which should have been already 3 months ago. I would have expected it, because people were thrown in jail and tortured. We had very reliable information that people were tortured in jail, and all international agreements allow to take sanctions against the state that is torturing people. Unfortunately, there was no reaction, and till now there is no reaction. And today the situation is much worse because Putin is quite getting ready to interfere. And besides, there are not very pronounced statements, not very pronounced measures taken to prevent it. Secretary General of NATO Stoltenberg made a very good statement, but what would be helpful is to declare that there will be sanctions against Russia if it happens, not only against Lukashenko, but against Russia, because it is a really very serious security breach in Europe, yet another one after Ukraine, after Georgia. So if it is allowed to happen, then every European country will be threatened, no matter how far or how close it is from the Belarus and Russia borders.
Mm-hmm. And on that topic, something that I think a lot of Western commentators have said is that the most important thing is to maintain Belarus's independence and sovereignty, because it acts as a sort of barrier between Russia and the rest of Europe. How do you think that, how can Lukashenko, after, if he does ride out the protests, will he be able to be sovereign at all? How will Belarus be able to be independent since he relies so much on Putin to save him now?
There was a lot of hypocrisy going on with this thesis that we were worried about the sovereignty and independence of Belarus. That is why let us deal with Lukashenko, because he is in power and he can guarantee this. He cannot guarantee it, is obvious today. And for a long time we were saying that only democratic process could guarantee the independence and sovereignty of Belarus and security in the region. If he maintains power, if he manages to survive, then the security will be really threatened. Both our security and international security in Europe. But our independence and sovereignty also will be under threat, because I think what is being discussed now, what Putin started to put on the table last year, the so-called roadmap of closer integration, which in Putin's view is incorporation of Belarus into Russia. Again, it's the mistake of the West and of Western analysts and strategists, geopolitics, that they are thinking that Putin plays by the rules, and that Putin is following some logic that could be understood and perceived and then dealt with probably. No, he is not. Because, as we discussed before, Belarus will be not an enemy of Russia, and relationship will be better with Russia after Lukashenko. And in many ways it will be very helpful for Russia, even for this regime in Russia, to have not an alienated country in the region for a change. Because it is, whether I want it or not, you see that the protest, Russia is not affected at all. It's not a topic at all during the protest. There were some attempts from Lukashenko's side to provoke anti-Russian statements, anti-Russian activities. No, people are not buying it.
How do you think that Svetlana Tikhanovskaya has been leading the protest? Do you see her as an effective future president of Belarus?
No, she is not even the opposition. I think she is under some obligations which allowed her to leave the country. And I think I'm grateful to her that she survived till the day of election. That she, although she hesitated, and it is well known that at one point she wanted to abandon the race and leave it. I know about two more moments of very difficult moments for her when she was thinking of resigning. So I'm grateful that she survived till the 9th of August. But today she is not a leader. She might be a factor that can help achieve the resignation of Lukashenko and to help the process of building the future in Belarus. I mean, starting the coalition talks and then new elections. But I don't see it in her now. She is distancing herself of the real problems. Yes, she's doing something, she's saying something, but it is not helping.
So one of the most remarkable things, at least for me, watching the protests is how much of the protests have been organized online by bloggers and vloggers and on the encrypted messaging app Telegram. And particularly the role of, for example, the blogger Nexta, who is working in Warsaw, and who has now over 2 million followers on his Telegram channel, and who almost directs the protests. How do you think that this new, how do you think this has changed the way that protests in Belarus have taken place? And do you see, and of course, Sergei Tikhanovsky was himself also a blogger, and it was his arrest that sparked the initial protests. So how do you think these new technologies, this new form of media communication, has changed opposition politics in Belarus?
I think it's a remarkable example, not only for us in Belarus, but for the world as well. Because yes, you are right, the bloggers were contributing very much to the mobilization of the people against the regime, a lot. That is why I think more than 10 of them are now arrested, are now in prison, and Lukashenko people are trying to fabricate the case against them, probably high treason case. Yes, and blogger Nexta and then also, Telegram channel. Also Telegram channel Basta, I can name you, then Belarus Головного мозга, so-called, it's Belarus of the brain damage. Many of them, yes, are really coordinating because inside Belarus, the communication is very difficult. It is blocked. They're blocking the mobile phones. They're blocking more than 40 websites that were providing information about what was going on and about the plans of the protesters are blocked today. And Telegram channel, the only channel that is still working if the telephone is not blocked, and it is still capable of providing information for the people, which is badly needed. And that is why they, by definition, they became the organizers of this protest, because they provided they provided the channel of communication for all Belarusians to understand what they could plan and what they could expect. And that is why it is a collective, I see it as a collective activity, not even, sometimes even not coordinated, but when there is a good idea, all Telegram channels start to promote it and start to distribute it over all kind of social media and messengers.
And it's interesting that local towns, every local town has its own Telegram group, right, where people can organize within their little local towns. Which is, I think, why there's been so many protests, not just in Minsk and in the big cities, but across the entire country.
And also another thing is chats.
Mm-hmm.
Chats are widely used because they are not visible. They could be closed. They could be closed chats between the people who know or even who don't know each other, but who can trust in terms of how to organize the protest locally. So yes, I think it is a know-how which is compared to what we saw in Iran, for example, with the Twitter, or what we saw in other places like Hong Kong, or in other places where social media was playing a very important role, and now messengers are playing a very important role.
One of the other similarities that I've noticed between the protests in Belarus and, for example, the protests in Hong Kong was this new strategy of not organizing a protest in one place, but being water. So spontaneously protesting in different points across the city, making it more difficult for the authorities to clamp down on one particular spot. And we saw this happening in Belarus over the past few weeks as well, which leads me to suggest that a global protest culture is starting to develop, where strategies are shared across different countries and between activists. And I think that maybe you'll agree with me that this is happening in Belarus as well, where people are drawing on tactics from protest movements around the world, and using them in their own countries with differences.
Yes, and of course I agree with you. Moreover, we did it on purpose. For example, there was a youth movement, Zubr, in Belarus that existed late 90s, beginning of the millennium, and they were translating and studying, distributing the literature of Solidarność of Poland, this conspira, so-called, or small conspira, and they were distributed the books of Gene Sharp, From Dictatorship to Democracy, and they were they were communicating with every resistance movement, like Otpor in Serbia, like Khmara in Georgia, like Pora in Ukraine. There is a lot of communication going on. And of course now it is much easier because you can do it online and you can learn from each other, but you can also learn from your experience. It was impossible for example, in Belarus to organize some camp of tents as protest camp, because it will, you're right, it will be immediately crushed as it happened in 2006, or to stay in the square during the night, because it would have been immediately crushed as it happened in 2010. So people are knowingly and by intuition, they started to organize this volatile protest.
And I mean, one of the problems that they face is the dictators are also starting to learn from each other. And I think, some of the internet shutdowns in Belarus is something similar that happened in, for example, the Arab Spring. Because a lot of those Arab governments started shutting down the internet because protesters were organizing so effectively online. And so my question, therefore, is, do you think that Lukashenko is learning from Putin or from Xi Jinping or from other dictators how to prevent protests? And is this, are we seeing an arms race between democratic movements and dictators in the world today?
Of course, they're learning from each other. I would say that Putin is learning from Lukashenko, because Lukashenko was testing all kind of suppression methods long before Putin, and it is clear that there is a patterns taken from Belarus and used in Russia. Of course, the Chinese technologies are very helpful for dictators to follow the social media and to identify the users that are not loyal to the regime. Of course, this system SORM, which was introduced in Russia, also is used in Belarus, also to follow the email accounts and social media accounts. And that's why, but yes, and they are being more effective with new technologies, dictators. Why? Because there is not much understanding from the giants of IT industries that they have to interfere, like Durov did, like Telegram. Durov just declared that there will be no censorship for Belarus Telegram channels. And recently he just changed Lukashenko's flag into white, red and white. That is an enormous support. We were addressing Google and Facebook and Twitter to do something with the blocking of independent websites, to hurt Lukashenko's IT business, demanding to unblock everything. But nothing happens. Belarus was insignificant. I think that there has to be pressure on IT industry to take care of cases like Lukashenko, because clearly it is the IT is used to deprive people of their basic rights and freedoms, not vice versa. And something has to be done with it. I know that there is a strong measures are being taken against monopoly of Facebook or Google or Microsoft in the West, in the United States. That's one thing, that's good, but see how the new technologies are used. You say Xi Jinping and Putin, but we have now evidence that the blocking of websites and messengers were done with technology that was developed in the United States. Mm-hmm. So those cases are, or other cases like this stunned grenade that killed people in Belarus were imported from Czechia unlawfully, because there is an embargo on such munition. So, in other words, if you take measures, I mean the democratic world, against dictators, please enforce them.
Mm-hmm. So you've mentioned already that sanctions should have been brought up quicker by the European nations, and that the measures we already have against Belarus should be enforced, and perhaps we should put more pressure on private companies to not support dictators. But what else? Is there anything else you think that Western countries, the EU or the US, should be doing right now to support the protesters in Belarus?
They do have a lot of soft power, a lot. They are lacking political will, and there is more soft power today, if you can say so, to introduce sanctions. Magnitsky Act. We didn't have this Magnitsky Act in 2010. Now, thanks to Bill Browder, we do have very effective instrument, which is much more effective than sanctions of European Union, because they introduced it and they lifted it, and they really encouraged Lukashenko to continue with crackdowns, because in 2016 sanctions were lifted, sanctions on criminals, which cannot be punished inside Belarus, because there is no independent judiciary, there is no judiciary system in Belarus. And Magnitsky Act is something that it is not easy to lift the sanctions against individuals who are there. Many, it is... I remember when I was in prison, there were many innovative methods used to put pressure, economic, financial pressure on Lukashenko. Although IMF provided him a year before, 2010 and 2009, IMF provided him with a huge loan of 3 billion that was used to keep it in prison.
So I'd like to ask you one final question, which is, what can private citizens, ordinary people in Western countries, in Poland, in England, in America do to help protesters in Belarus and support the cause of freedom there?
I do believe in people more than I believe in politicians, because, it has been, unfortunately, a lot of real politics going around Belarus and used as a tool in Belarus. But when I see people today responding to our tragedy and to people being killed and crippled and beaten and thrown in jail in Belarus, I do believe that people could do a lot, those people who care. First, put pressure on politicians, if necessary, because there are a lot of politicians today do understand what's going on in Belarus, and they are able to take measures, but draw the attention of politicians in the United States or the legislature and executive branch as well in all European countries, because it should not go unnoticed. And I think that every person matters who supports Belarus, who supports freedom in Belarus. And
you were finishing your answer.
okay, yeah. You know, I once heard, I think, very wise person, Chinese dissident, Nobel Peace winner, Nobel Peace Prize winner, Li Shaoba, who was in prison, and he said, you know, everything is interconnected in the world. I don't think that Solidarność and Velvet Revolution would happen in Europe without Tiananmen happening in China. I think he was absolutely right. There is, you mentioned yourself that there is a not only experience exchange between the protesters and freedom fighters, but there is also a mood of justice and freedom that is being spread, especially when the situation develops like it does in Belarus. So for the people who really care, I would say let's make the 9th of August 2020 the point of no return for Lukashenko and his regime.
Okay, well, thank you very much for being on this podcast, and I hope that together with all the people listening and everyone else that we can make that happen.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation.
Okay. Thank you for listening to this podcast. We hope you enjoyed our conversation about democracy, activism, and human rights in Belarus. If you would like to support the protests in Belarus, visit belarussolidarity.fund.com. For more updates and more information on the situation in Belarus, follow the Human Rights Foundation on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.